know how sometimes you're thinking and you realize you're actually translating everything in your head before you can even think in English?
Yeah, like you're stuck in this loop of going back and forth between your native language and English.
And that can be so exhausting. You end up feeling like you're never really fluent because you're always translating in your head.
Right. It's like there's this extra step that slows everything down.
So today we're going to dive into this problem and see if we can find some ways to actually train our brains to think directly in English.
That's great.
We've got this really interesting conversation between two people, Lisa and John, who are talking about this very thing.
Oh, cool.
And their ideas are really practical and actually make a lot of sense. Like, they're not just theoretical, they're things you can actually start doing today to shift your thinking.
I'm all ears. Let's hear what they have to say.
Lisa's first suggestion was really simple, almost so simple that you might overlook it. She basically said, when you're alone, just start describing what you're doing out loud in English.
Interesting.
You know, like, I'm making coffee, I'm opening the fridge, I'm walking the dog.
I see. So you're kind of creating your own English narration for your life.
Exactly. And even though it sounds super basic, it actually starts to build this new neural connection in your brain.
It's like you're bypassing the translation step and directly linking the action with the English words.
Right. And the more you do it, the less weird it feels.
Well, yeah. I can imagine it feeling a little strange at first. Like, am I really talking to myself in English right now?
You're totally going to feel self-conscious, especially in the beginning. But that's kind of a good sign, you know? It means you're actually making an effort to change those deeply ingrained thought patterns.
So the key is to just push through that initial awkwardness.
Yeah. And as you keep practicing, it will eventually become more natural and automatic. You'll start thinking, I'm making coffee in English without even realizing you're doing it.
And then Lisa had this other idea about visual cues. She said to try labeling objects around your house with sticky notes.
Oh, right. Like putting a note that says table on your table, chair on your chair.
Right, so you're constantly seeing the English word associated with the actual object.
Mm.
It's like creating this mini English world right in your own home.
I love that. It takes the idea of association to a whole new level.
And it makes so much sense because it's like every time you look at that object, you're also seeing the English word, and it just reinforces that connection.
You're not even giving your brain a chance to translate. It just goes straight from the object to the English word.
But what happens when you come across something and you don't know the English word for it? That's when it can be easy to slip back into translating.
That's a great point. That's where Lisa's suggestion about circumlocution comes in.
Circumlocution.
Basically, it means trying to describe something using other English words that you already know.
Oh, I see. So instead of immediately going to your dictionary or translator, you try to work it out in English.
Exactly. So let's say you don't know the word kettle. Instead of translating it, you might say, that thing you use to boil water for tea.
Right. You're basically describing it in a roundabout way using simpler words. It forces you to think in English, even when you're missing a specific word.
And it's a really good way to expand your vocabulary because you start to see how different words and ideas are connected.
So you might even end up learning the word kettle just from trying to explain it in other ways.
Exactly. Now, a lot of people talk about immersion being really important for language learning, like watching movies, listening to podcasts, reading books. But even when we're surrounded by English, sometimes it feels like we're still translating in our heads.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that passive listening mode where you're hearing the words but not really engaging with them.
So how do we make that immersion more active?
Lisa had this interesting suggestion called shadowing.
Shadowing, okay.
Have you heard of this?
I've heard the term, but I'm not entirely sure what it means. What is it exactly?
So you find a piece of English audio that you like, maybe a short clip from a podcast or a YouTube video, and as you listen, you try to repeat what you hear almost simultaneously, like you're shadowing the speaker's voice.
Ah, I get it. You're trying to match their rhythm, their speed, their intonation, everything.
Yeah, precisely. And it's really good for your pronunciation because you're forced to pay attention to all the subtle nuances of how English is spoken.
And you're not just listening passively. You're actively producing the sounds, which helps your brain make those connections.
And because you're doing it in real time, it really strengthens your ability to process and produce English on the fly, which can help reduce that reliance on translation.
And Lisa had this other really intriguing idea about using the time before sleep to your advantage.
Right, so she was saying that our brains are actually really active while we sleep, processing and consolidating information,
So she suggested spending a few minutes before bed just thinking in English.
like reviewing your day or thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow.
Yeah, and even something as simple as saying to yourself, tomorrow I will go to the gym, then meet my friend for coffee, can be really powerful.
Because you're basically giving your brain a final dose of English before you drift off. And it can help solidify those thought patterns.
It's like planting a seed in your subconscious.
And then you wake up, and your brain has been working on it all night.
That's fascinating. Now, let's be honest, learning a new language can be really frustrating sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. You hit those roadblocks where you can't find the right word or you stumble over a sentence, and it can feel discouraging.
Lisa talked to John about this, and I think what she said was really important.
What was that?
She said, it's okay to make mistakes. Like, even native English speakers don't speak perfectly all the time.
Right. They pause, they use filler words like, and they rephrase things.
And sometimes they just completely mess up a sentence. It's normal.
So it's about shifting your focus from trying to be perfect to just trying to communicate.
Yeah, just get your message across. And
Yeah.
the more you do that, the less afraid you'll be of making mistakes.
And that will make you more confident and fluent in the long run.
And speaking of communication, Lisa's final piece of advice was all about actually talking to people in English.
Right, like finding language exchange partners or joining conversation groups.
Because when you're having a real conversation, you're forced to think on your feet and come up with the words in real time.
It's so much more challenging than just thinking to yourself.
But it's also so much more rewarding. Like, you're actually using the language to connect with another human being.
And that's what language is all about. It's about communication, connection, sharing ideas.
But let's quickly recap those key strategies from Lisa and John's conversation.
Okay, I'm ready.
They talked about starting simple by describing your everyday actions in English.
Yeah, that one seems easy enough to start with.
Then using visual cues like labeling objects to reinforce those connections.
Makes sense.
And when you don't know a word, try to explain it using other English words instead of immediately translating.
Right. Circumlocution. I'm going to try to remember that one.
And then actively engage with English audio by shadowing what you hear.
I can see how that would really help with pronunciation.
And use those pre-sleep moments to give your brain a final boost of English thinking.
Clever trick.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just focus on communicating your message.
That's a good reminder. We all need to be a little kinder to ourselves.
And finally, actively seek out opportunities to have real conversations in English.
The more you use the language, the better you'll get.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Which of these techniques feels like the most natural fit for you right now?
Yeah, good question.
Which one could you see yourself incorporating into your daily routine? And if you were to consistently practice just one of these techniques for a week, what do you think you might notice shifting in your relationship with English?
That's something to think about.
I think you might be surprised at how quickly you start to feel more comfortable and confident thinking and speaking in English.
I'm definitely going to try some of these out.
Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We hope these strategies help you on your journey to thinking in English more naturally and effortlessly.
It's been great, as always. Until next time.
See ya.